Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to move on for today anyway from the problems of Brexit shortages, which were warned about a long time ago and are now very evident, and on to the next disaster. Some of the companies who exist to supply these essential resources are starting to go to the wall. And further, what I'd like to consider is how the capitalist model that we use to fund these companies also makes crises like this more likely, which obviously reduces supply even more and could power up a potential winter of discontent, Boris Johnson style this time. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So first things first, I have unfortunately been blighted with that most unhelpful of illnesses when you talk for a living, a bit of a sore throat and a cough. But I've dosed up on ice cream and hot drinks, so we should be okay. I couldn't decide which would do best, cold or heat, so I just did both. But anyway, problems. We have big problems now, and I'm afraid quite a good chunk of this week, if you're not interested in petrol crises or the fallout over the lorry driver visas, you're not going to enjoy this week, because pretty much there's so much to discuss. We have a huge crisis, and it puts me in mind of that immortal line from Blackadder. This is a crisis, a large crisis. In fact, if you've got a moment, it's a 12-storey crisis with a magnificent entrance hall, carpeting throughout, 24-hour portage, and an enormous sign on the roof saying, "This is a large crisis." Where we are up until this point was a lack of capacity to supply. This has often been a result of Brexit shortages of lorry drivers, but sometimes other workers, but also related to trade barriers on the movement of goods between Britain and the rest of Europe. And remember, we still don't have those trade barriers backwards, or not many of them. You know, we're still not doing checks on stuff from the EU. It'd be even worse then. And in the absence of government action, the companies who provide these vital services to our supply chain were left to fight amongst themselves for limited resources, including staff. Because that's the Conservative way, isn't it? Market forces and all that. Well, it was going to happen sooner or later that some of these businesses would not be able to carry on. Now we seem to be seen to start that happening. First of all, a company has just gone into administration. A Derbyshire firm that provides both haulage and storage has gone to the wall. Amongst their customers, supermarket giants Asda and Sainsbury's. It's called EVCL Chill, and it was reported to have run out of the funds to pay their workers and their debts. Most of the jobs seem to have been saved by transferring to what was former key customers. Basically, I'm guessing some of their staff, which will presumably include all of their drivers, will have just gone to Asda, Sainsbury's and any others that were contracting them. But that still leaves about 350 jobs at risk of just being lost, and that's it. And if they ran out of money to pay the wages, what does that mean about the incomes of those workers, even in the short term? Now, as a little aside, and I do want to talk about this for the next example particularly as well, the Unite Union, which presumably represents a fair number of these workers, were pointing out the problems of letting venture capitalists have involvement in industries like this. And that's a fair point, because this group, this company, it's not just like a company and that's it, it's owned by some people and that's all there is to it. Now they've lost their livelihood. It was the company was owned by a group that owns a portfolio of other businesses. Well, the group hasn't gone bust, but because this company was just part of their portfolio, they get to just leave it to insolvency and continue to keep the rest of their business. Any costs will fall to the taxpayer. And in a situation like this, businesses like this can become insolvent much more easily, because there's obviously no one wants to lose a profitable business. They're not going to let a profitable business go to the wall as such. But they're not going to try as hard. If it was a company owned by some people whose entire income goes, if it goes to the wall, they'll try harder to save it. So the people profiting from this business in the good times will not be suffering now in the bad. And it's been said before, hasn't it? These billionaires are all about socialism and the intervention of the state when times are tough. Oh yeah, when they want handouts, they absolutely want the government to get involved, but they want the government to leave them alone in the good times to make maximum profits. But never mind that for now, we'll come back to that. That's not what caused the collapse. It's just going to cost ordinary people while the wealthy protect their profits. And this may just be the thin end of the wedge. When we have a desperate shortage of both storage and haulage, you may reasonably think to yourself, so how does a company that provides both go under? Well, if you don't have the staff to run operations, then you can't run operations. If you haven't got the money to pay for them, you can't even keep the staff you do have. You know, the thing is, what people need to understand is these companies, like I said, they've got contracts to run services. You know, Asda and Sainsbury's were their largest customers. They're the ones reported anyway. So they had a contract with them, which will have been agreed, and the price will have been agreed. Now, once the cost of supplying that service outstrips what you're making from your contract, you can't make ends meet, and it's simple as that. That's why they couldn't just keep paying whatever is needed to get the staff. And this could start to happen more and more with smaller operators. The government keep trying to say, just pay more. Oh, you complain you haven't got lorry drivers, just pay them more, pay them more. And it's like, you've already agreed to do the job for a set price before you knew this was going to happen. And if you, I mean, they presumably went to Asda and Sainsbury's and said, look, we cannot supply you at the agreed price. We're going to have to increase it, to which they'll have said, no, we're going to hold you to your contract. And presumably now what they've had to say is, well, we've now run out of money, and they've called in the receivers. You know, if the worker shortage isn't addressed, and it isn't being, 3-month visas for a small proportion of our shortages isn't going to deal with this problem, even in the short term, much less the long term. Then how do you avoid more businesses like this going under? The government continue to try and tell us there are no shortages. All these companies have to do is pay higher wages and the staff will be there. Well, this just exposes the lie. And don't get me wrong, it's absolutely true that there are some qualified HGV drivers who are doing other jobs because the combination of working conditions and pay isn't tempting enough for them. But a company doesn't go into insolvency out of spite. If there was a way to get those drivers and continue to make a profit, because that's what they care about, of course they would have done. And this suggests that small outfits are limited in how much they can pay. And if that amount is below the threshold needed to attract staff, that's it. You know, whereas you look at the ones who are managing much better, Amazon famously, McDonald's, Tesco, well, they employ their own drivers. They make large profits. They can afford to pay more. They may not like it, but they can afford to pay more. A smaller company running contracts at a fixed price that can't just increase their prices, pass them on, because it's long-term contracts, they're limited in what they can do. But it's not just haulage where there are problems. Look at where we have critical shortages, and there will be struggling companies behind it as well. The Sunday Times yesterday ran a report saying that a refinery in Cheshire is close to collapse. This refinery was reported to supply us with about 1/6 of our petrol and is in crisis talks with HMRC. Basically can't pay the money back. Okay, a refinery supplying 1/6 of our petrol. Just as well we've got a lot of petrol then. Just as well we don't have a petrol crisis, otherwise this might be serious. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. My first thought when I saw the report was, aye, petrol crisis in the country. Then suddenly a refinery says it might have to stop supplying because it's having financial problems. And it's got problems with HMRC. That's our Revenues and Collections Agency. Oh, if only the government would be understanding and do us a solid on our debt repayments and we'll probably be fine. The government, not wanting an even deeper crisis, lets them off with a load of taxes and, well, in this case, it's debt repayments, and the rich just got a bit richer. And this may well be the case, and I think it probably is. And I wouldn't expect any paper that is even reporting on this to tell me the full truth about exactly how much trouble they're in and what led to it. But I do accept that they've struggled during the pandemic. At the end of the day, this company produces petrol. There wasn't as much need for petrol during the pandemic, during the lockdown, because people weren't driving around as much. They also supply aviation fuel, Manchester Airport nearby. Obviously, flights weren't going ahead as much. So, of course, they couldn't make as much money. So they took out a government pandemic loan to get them through and now need to start paying it back, only they say they can't. Why not? Didn't their business plan work out, getting through the pandemic? They surely didn't think it would be over in a few months. Didn't they anticipate the amount of lockdown we'd have ended up with? I mean, it's possible, but that seems ridiculous to me. But given that the latest lockdown has been over for months, why just bring it up now? Why didn't they say something sooner? It still sounds to me like taking advantage of a national crisis to reduce their outgoings at the taxpayers' expense. And this idea was given credence when the same article cited governance concerns, that some of the money from the loan was maybe diverted away from the refinery. Again, venture capitalism, bring it back. You know, a group, well, a business that's effectively opened by a group with a large portfolio, funnel money from one venture into the other, and then let it collapse. You keep the rest of the money. You know, were they pumping some of the money from the loan away in the knowledge that they could either get the government to bail them out? Obviously, that will have been their plan A, get the government to bail them out, or just let the whole thing collapse into administration, making a healthy profit either way. Will the government chase the money? I doubt it. Because what we're talking about here is not like the haulage company, where it just failed. You know, it wasn't down to the owners as such that it failed. You know, and the controlling group didn't accept responsibility. That's their fault. But they didn't deliberately run it into the ground. In the case of this refinery, it may be a deliberate case of funneling money away, creating the conditions for insolvency itself. But who knows? But if it does go into administration, and I get, you know, the impression from this report that the government aren't keen on bailing them out. And yes, the government will make sure the receivers keep the refinery going. You can't just let a refinery collapse in the middle of a petrol crisis. But even the news that this thing is going under, wouldn't that just cause more panic? At a time when panic is really bad, you know, when we already have panic buying of the resource that this facility provides. But regardless of the extra mess that unregulated capitalism is potentially causing here, what we nonetheless have are market conditions that are putting pressures on companies who are supplying goods or services that are crucial to our lives. This is why free market policies do not work. You have to have government intervention at times like this. Otherwise, further disasters are inevitable. So further disasters are inevitable. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.